Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'd like to talk about the transcendence bias. You may have noticed that in a lot of religions, traditions, and philosophies, there is this idea of being liberated, being saved, having a moment of total peace or saturation, stillness, a breaking through or a dissolving of the illusion. And that is often called as a type of a transcendence. There's nothing inherently wrong with this idea. In fact, the concept that there's a me here and there's an outside world out there, and that somehow the dynamic between me and the world creates a lot of tension and a lot of suffering, is legitimate and valid. When I have these thoughts, these emotions, these sensations, and these perceptions, and I'm immersed in those, it can often feel like I'm in this river. I'm totally merged with those thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, and memories. And so a lot of times a religion or a tradition will say, hey, you're in a river. You're totally swept away by all of these thoughts, all of these impressions, by this relationship that you have with an outside world that you haven't even investigated if that outside world is true or if the you that you think you are is true. So let me show you how to build a lifeboat. Let me show you how to put the pieces together so that you can start to climb out of this river that you're totally immersed in. And then once you sit on that lifeboat, and once you have the reins, and once you're managing these thoughts and emotions and sensations and perceptions, you have a lot more choice. You have a lot more capacity. You might even be able to guide your lifeboat off to the side of the river and maybe even step out for a moment and sit on the shore and dry off and take in the space. And that is a beautiful habit of many religions and traditions. Here are the tools so that you can have a different perspective, so that you can come up and out of this river that you are totally underneath, and so that you can see for just a moment how it's going past and how maybe you can step away from it. The bias is when those religions, traditions, or philosophies somehow start to create language that says that stepping out of the river is more real, more divine, and more true than being in the river. And that's where I like to challenge the narrative. If we have the tools to come up and out of our thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, and memories, that is, if we have meditation, or prayer, or devotion, or chanting, if we have some kind of dedicated practice, either one that's internal and silent and still, or in community, or by showing up in a circle, or by showing up and listening to somebody speak, or by the recitation of something sacred, a sacred text perhaps, surely those same tools can help us to come back into our life, to come back into our body. But way too often, I'm seeing that religions, traditions, and philosophies only take us out of the river. And then they say, hey, stillness is better than movement. Life is an illusion. Your suffering is caused because the world is unreal. Find ultimate truth. Find liberation. Find salvation. Once we've had a taste of transcendence, of total recognition that I am a bigger me than I used to think I was, and this has a lot of different ways, right? So sometimes transcendence is truly a dissolving into what can be called the mind of God. Sometimes it's a seeing that everything is one luminous pulsation of being. But sometimes it's simply seeing that inside of my being somewhere, I've agreed to something that isn't even true. Somewhere inside of my being, I've agreed to a thought that says, I'm not good enough, or a thought that says, I am not worthy of love, or a thought that says, you're too much. Be less you. These are all kind of related. When you really see what's running the show, these thoughts, and you're able to integrate a much bigger, much more whole view reality, that's also a transcendence. A transcendence can be a dissolving into infinity. It can also be a total recognition of a pattern that has held us back and that we're no longer willing to agree to. We've all of a sudden gotten much bigger and we can hold a much larger heart space for ourselves. Now, once we start to redefine this transcendence as integration, as a turning of the wheel, then maybe we can begin to develop the language to come back out of transcendence and into the embodied, into the particular, into the individual, now wiser, now more spacious, now containing more complexity. If we don't have this language, if we don't understand, hey, what is transcendence anyway? And hey, how do I get back into the river? How do I become human again? Then it might be seen as a failure when the body coalesces after the transcendence. When you go from the infinitely large to the small and contracted, to having limitation, to having a body, to having these thoughts that might come back, these memories that are still there in the field. And you don't have a lot of spaciousness, or you're not fed by a tradition that is inclusive of the condensing phase, it might really hurt. You might be experiencing something more like a transcendence hangover, where it's like, I've seen the infinitely large. Why did I have to come back into the infinitely small? Did I fail? Did I make a mistake? Is there somebody out there that can bring me back to that experience? Can I go chase that experience? Can I go start taking more and more retreats, workshops? Can I go study with more and more teachers? Can I become a little bit promiscuous in my mysticism? That's only possible when the transcendence is held on a pedestal. When we don't have the tools and techniques and the language in our traditions that says, hey, coming into the individual and the particular is also sacred. Hey, gaining the wisdom from those apertures, from that opening into those states, which are totally natural and totally accessible. But if we don't have that ability to come back into the particular in a deeply graceful way, then it really hurts. And that's the bias. It's not the transcendence that's the problem. Transcendence is natural. Transcendence is necessary. Transcendence is part of this turning of the wheel of coming back again and again to the heart and asking, how big are you, heart? Whoa, you're that big? Are you even bigger? And then going through that again and again and opening and then closing and then opening and then closing. And you scrape that wheel again and again and again. But the point is that there isn't a one-way road. There is a turning. There is a turning of this. And coming back into the limited is a digesting, is an assimilating, is a kind of integrating of all of that wisdom. We don't let it go. We turn toward it. We assimilate it. We become spacious for other people who are also going through it. How are we going to build compassion toward our friends in the human journey if we think that stillness is better than movement? Or if we call non-duality transcendence, and then we say things like the body is unreal, or your problems are unreal, or the world is unreal. We need both, and the one needs to integrate into the other. This capacity to turn again and again, to touch down on, oh, what is that? How big is my heart? Ah, so big. Let me taste that directly. Let me become more reverent toward myself. Let me become more devoted toward this heart. And then we can carry that forward. And instead of slipping into a transcendence hangover, we just ride the ride. It's beautiful to jump back in that river. It is beautiful to take in the scenes. It's beautiful to touch the air on our skin. From inside our thoughts and emotions, our memories, our sensations, our perceptions, this body is a sensory body. And it's constantly interfacing with the heart, constantly interfacing with an outer world and an inner world. The more we're able to hold that without creating a bias inside of ourselves that says, this is better, the more human we become. And the more human we become, the more transcendent we become, the more the heart is dialed in. And that is true devotion. And the devotion opens and unfolds and peels us. May we do that. May we create that language.